السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله بلغ رسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وكشف الغمة وجاهد في سبيل الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين ونحن على ذلك من الشهداء. أما بعد, جزاكم الله خير, my dear brothers and sisters. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless this gathering. So today, we're going to be talking about a new episode that talks about some of the barriers for our future generation. And today, we're going to be talking about a subject that, unfortunately, many people tend to belittle its importance in the contemporary world nowadays. Brothers and sisters, whether we like it or not, we are living now a very serious time in which that there is many new things going to be coming up and many more challenges going to be facing us, whether we like it or not, because there is so much instabilities that exist in the world nowadays. And in order for us to comprehend, in order for us to understand what's going on, we have to put in perspective what have happened in the past. And for those who does not understand the past, they're not going to understand the present. For those who do not understand the past, they're not going to be able to understand the present. So it's important for us, for any young man or young woman, to look that what's going on now in the earth nowadays, what's going on now today in our life, it's nothing more like a continuation of what have happened in the past. And for those who does not understand the past, they're not going to be able to understand the present, And if we look at many occasions that happened in the history of this world, or happened in the history of Islam, you'll be able to understand and almost predict what's going to happen in the future. Like, for instance, when the campaign of Napoleon, when he wanted to occupy Egypt, that's one of the important occasions in the history of the world. How he conquered and his empire was expanded, and when he came to Egypt, all this they froze. So it's for someone to read history and to dwell and look into why what was the intent of Napoleon, how his empire was spreading, and how he was able to conquer many places, but yet it came to an end at one time or another. So they say, we have a saying in Arabic in which it says the following: "Man la يقرأ التاريخ لا يفهم الواقع." The one who does not read history, they're not going to understand the present. Again, for the one who does not read history, they will not understand the present. And why is that? Because there are routines that happen. So there is sunnah. The sunnah Allah fil kawn. There is always sunnah, things that are repeated over and over during history, that a lot of times people can almost predict what's going to be happening. Okay, so it's important for our youth to understand and contemplate and read what happened in history in order for them to understand what's happening nowadays in today's world, and for them to be able to connect. When you read history, you're able to connect the present with the past. You're able to connect the present with the past, and that takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of reading and listening and comparing and contrasting different text. And while you are dwelling and while you are exploring, you will notice that there are many things that have happened in the past that is happening nowadays. If we look at if you look at some of the things that happened in the Islamic Ummah, like, for instance, when we look at here, I'm going to be mentioning a few things that is worthwhile for each and every Muslim to understand. Like, for instance, how the colonization started in the Islamic world. What do we call the World War I and II? How the Zionist movement have started. How the liberal movement have started. How was the media, how the media have occupied some of the Arab world and the Islamic world. How was the pan-Arabism the Arabism, how it at one time it was expanding and then all of a sudden it shrunk. It- how secularism is now spreading in the Muslim world. What about socialism? What about communism? You know, so all of these things, brothers and sisters, is really worthwhile for someone to understand and for them to complement on. So, brothers and sisters, yani, it's for someone who does not read history, wallahi, they're not going to be able to understand what what what's happening right now. So, um, today I'm going to be mentioning again some of the few events that happened in the 19th century and the 20th century that is worthwhile for any normal person to know about. Okay, worthwhile for each and every person to know about. Look, for instance, here we're talking about. Let's talk about the 19th century. What's some of the events that is worthwhile for someone to know about? Like, for instance, if you look at the 19th century, you'd be able to kind of look into what like I mentioned, what Napoleon have done when he came by to invade Egypt. How did his campaign started and where did it end? Also, it's worthwhile to know the struggle that existed between the French and the British, as they were expanding. Also, you have to understand how Muhammad Pasha is one of the when how his leadership in the Muslim world was. When did it start and how did it end? Also, for you to know how the colonization of Egypt, if Algeria started by the French, and how did it end? How the media started in the Arab world and how it was controlled by a few individuals. How the British conquered India, and how did it end, and how the colonization, took over most of the Muslim world. It's also to know about icons. For instance, like someone like Jamaluddin al-Afghani, he was one of the iconic people that have struggled with colonization. Also, is one of the key figures that some people need to know about is the ruling of Sultan Abdul Hamid, the last ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Also, for you to know about how the Zionist movement started, how the Zionist movement, where did it come, where it was, what was the plan, what countries that they have chose, and how did they try to come up with a deal with Sultan Abdul Hamid, and how was it put down, what ways they tried to implement their deals in an indirect way. So all of these things is important, brothers and sisters. Some new things that happened in the 20th centuries, movements that happened in 20th century, how the British Empire expanded, and what was its boundaries, the continuation of Sultan Abdul Hamid ruling, and the Khalifa of the Ottoman Empire, the Balfour Promise, and its effect, the detrimental effect that we are seeing it right now, the First World War, the end of the Ottoman Empire, how how Muslims struggled against colonization intellectually, militarily, and even with knowledge. How did they struggle? How some of the Muslim countries were able to liberate themselves? How was some of the movement within the Muslim world that were created to contrast the colonization. How feminism started in the Muslim world, how feminism started, and by whom, and who they were funded by. What was their plan, and when. All of these things. What are the roots of secularism within the Muslim world? The Orientalism, or we call them Mustashrikun. How did they come about? What was their motive? How they're created? How many movements that they had throughout the century? The Islamic movement, their types, their differences. What did they stand for? The good and the bad. The Second World War, the creation of the United Nations, and why? What was the essence? So, brothers and sisters, it's important for us to once you read about each one of these as a youth, you know, how how the Soviet Union collapsed, you know, how the Soviet, brothers and sisters, the whole point here, the whole here we're just mentioning 2 centuries, 2 centuries. Okay. What about even if we want to dig deeper and look into what happened even in the past? SubhanAllah, today I was listening to how how uh, يعني the Tatars collapsed. You know, the Tatars when they went, the Tatars in the beginning of in the 11th century, how they expanded and destroyed the Muslim world. When the Tatar entered into Baghdad, they killed almost 2 million people. 2 million people when they entered into Baghdad, they killed almost 2 million people, and the Tatar kept expanding all the way until they reached Palestine. And how people used to say, the Muslims used to say back then, if someone said that the Tatar lost, know that they're lying. Yeah, look at how much people thought the Tatar power was. If someone would say that the Tatar have lost, they would say you must be a liar. So what happened? What happened? Their first lost, the first loss of the Tatar was in Gaza. The first loss of the Tatar was in Gaza, Palestine, where they were faced by Qutuz and his leadership. And after they lost in Gaza, people revoluted. People got, yeah, they were excited. They had the enthusiasm, and some of them even rebelled against their own rulers. Some of the Muslims, because there was corrupt leadership back then. People revolted against their leadership, okay, and they went behind Qutuz, and Qutuz collected his army, and they faced the Tatar in Eid Jalut. And now it's known like the war, or the battle of Ain Jalut. The battle of Ain Jalut, which also in Palestine, was the where the Tatar broke down, and it was their end. The end of their expansion ended where? In Palestine. So when you think about this thing, brothers and sisters, how this can be replicated nowadays, it's almost make you think about our world. Fortunately, many of our youth, they live in their own bubble. They live with their own room. They care less about what happened. Maybe the only thing they care about is which kind of games that they're playing. Look, when you bring yourself down to that level, is all of your thinking is games, and what type, what level. And back then, they used to think about, how can I become more intellectual? How can I predict the future? How can I help the ummah? How can I become a better Muslim? Look at the goals of our youth nowadays, where their goals is not just it's not tangible, meaning you can't even feel it. It's imaginary. Their goal is imaginary, versus someone goal 1,000 years ago. An average young youth Muslim was, how can I benefit my ummah? How can I solve this problem? And that's the problem between the two brothers and sisters. So inshallah, this is what I have for you for today, is for us to give you just a touch of how important history, and how can help us to become better Muslims. جزاكم الله خير. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.